Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin. This is Familia. This is gonna be a good one. This is gonna be a good one. I've been wanting to have our invitado for a long time, and just so glad that we're making it happen. Gosh, I mean, well, first off, I want to make sure before anything else, you're liking and subscribing Familia FFB on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. We got great guests coming up that are just going to keep giving you just a lot of great fantasy football content. We're gonna delve into some baseball today too, because you know what. This is someone, Scott Pianowski, mi amigo. He's been someone that I've long admired and enjoyed his work, even before I started doing the fantasy space, when I was just playing the game. And a couple of years ago, we got to sit next to each other at the auction for the Kings Classic at the Fantasy Football Expo. And we just kept going back and forth and bonded over how we mismanaged our budgets and everything like that. And it's honestly, it's been so awesome calling this man, not only an amigo, but also a colleague at Yahoo. And many days, I mean, then when I edited his work, you know, I marveled at how eloquently he just put great advice into just a few words. And we also had some fun debates and even more fun e-chats along about a lot of different things. So for me, that he is the originator of the Raul Ibanez All-Stars, but he is not a Raul Ibanez All-Star. He's a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best of the best. Bienvenidos to mi amigo, Scott Pianowski. Mi amigo, welcome.
Thank you. Gracias. It took 4 years of high school Spanish. I wish I could rely on that and just speak in two languages as effortlessly as you do. But it's great to be doing this. We talked probably for 20 minutes before you hit record. I hope we didn't leave it all in the bullpen, but I'm sure we didn't. And we're both.
No, it was good.
Yeah, it was real good stuff. And you're going to hear my dog barking in the background. I apologize for that.
It's all good.
Yeah, I don't know if she barks in English or Spanish, or she's bilingual, but we are around the same age. Your fantasy, I think you said your fantasy baseball goes back to 1990. I first joined the league in 1988. We're about the same age. We have a lot of the same points of reference. Although one of the things we were talking about backstage before we started was Taylor Swift and your experiences with having 3 daughters and and going to Taylor Swift concerts and Kanye West and Halloween costumes and just really great stuff. But yeah, this is going to be a blast because this is what a podcast should be. It should be a conversation between two people who are interested and engaged in what the other person has to say. And, we just basically get to talk, hit record, and then hopefully people can find it and they enjoy it too. So let's do it.
Yeah, and hopefully they enjoy it. But you know what? And it's great. And it's also kind of like a cool time in the calendar that we're at, because the NFL draft just happened. The NBA and the NHL playoffs are going crazy. Sorry to my Laker fans, friends. Baseball, we just turned the calendar to May. We had a crazy local, month of April, and Kentucky Derby's coming. Gosh, I mean, it just all this great stuff. And best of the best, Michigan temperatures I saw are starting to climb up a little bit and get into nice outside weather, right?
I did some chipping and putting this morning, right before breakfast. Go ahead.
By the way, I remember seeing last year you got your first hole in one. Tell me about it.
I did. I'm not sure how great of a story it was, because the unfortunate part of it was my first hole in one. I have a feeling it's going to be the only one I get. I fluctuate between a 14 or 15 handicap when I'm playing well, and I'm maybe a 17, 18 handicap when the game isn't as sharp, but that's about where I'm at. So there's a course. I live in Berkeley, Michigan, and there's a solid public course called Rackham. It's right by the Detroit Zoo. It's 7 minutes from my house. And for whatever reason, my best golfing friends don't live that close to me, and there's some awesome courses near where they live. So I usually come to them when we play golf. And I had never played this Rackham course. It had been sitting in my backyard for 15, 18, 20 years. And I think I didn't think it was the greatest course. I think I thought it was maybe less of a course than it really is. It's a solid course. It's not an amazing course, but it's a solid course. The no laying up guys did some golf shows from Michigan, and they talked about different courses they played, and they really loved the old school layout of Rackham. I mean, it's in good shape. It's a solid public course. It's not the best course you'll ever play, but it's certainly worth playing. So Rackham was a course I got introduced to kind of late in my time in Michigan. I've been here since 2001. And so last year, fall, my friend Matt said, "Oh, let's play around. Let's play one closer to you. Why don't we play Rackham?" We played it a couple of times. It wasn't one of our courses we'd play a lot, and we play it. And for whatever reason, I was consistent that day, but I wasn't great. I had bogeyed the first 7 holes, and I felt like I was scrambling pretty well, but I wasn't hitting the ball that great. And I'm just thinking, I don't really have a lot working today. Not that 7 bogeys is bad. If I make 18 bogeys in an afternoon and shot 90, that's actually not a bad round for me.
It's
I
a
would
great day.
Yeah, for sure. And golf is about being consistent. It's about your worst score a lot of times more than your best score. But it wasn't some day where there are some days where you're hitting the ball great. I mean, last year I had a round where through 7 holes I was -1. I couldn't believe it. I don't think that's ever going to happen again either. I promptly made like a gigantic score on the 8th hole, and that all went out the window. But the 7 holes were fun. Anyway, Rackham, 8th hole, par 3. About maybe 165 or so. I'm getting up there in age. I'm hitting hybrids pretty well. So I took out a hybrid and I hit it. And I thought, okay, that's really tracking well towards the hole. And it landed, rolled towards the pin. And I just saw the ball disappear. And the pin was in the back and there's a little bit of a slope. And I figured at that point, the ball either gone in the hole or what I thought was maybe more realistic 60-40 was that it rolled off the back of the green because there's a little roll off at the back. So I just looked at my partners like, did that go in? Did that roll off? And we all kind of thought, I think it might have gone in, but I didn't get I didn't get that moment where I saw it. I've had 2 shots in my life over 100 yards that I've holed, and both times they were blind. One of them was literally just a back location that you couldn't see it. In this case, it's just, I guess I'm getting older. Maybe I need to get new glasses. I couldn't precisely know it was in, but I thought there was a chance. Maybe I was 50-50 on it. So we drive up, cart, get to the back of the pin, which is the back of the hole, which is very neatly manicured. So if my ball had rolled off, I would have spotted it immediately, and I didn't see it. And at this point, I'm like 95.5. It's in the hole, and I'm walking up closer. And I looked, and there's my ball just staring right at me. And so, I was in a good mood the rest of the day. I wish I had shot a great round. I think I might have shot 90 on the nose. I needed to do something on the 18th hole to get into the 80s. I wanted to have a better number for my first ace, but whatever. I mean, I could have shot 100 on the back. Who really cares? And I think you asked me in the show notes about how much it cost me. It turns out my friend Matt, who I play with, and I'm so glad I had a good friend with me to authorize it. We played with 2 people I didn't know, and everybody was super nice to me, but I wasn't responsible for some crazy bar bill. Like my friend Dave Dowd, a guy I grew up with, unbelievable golfer and a super nice guy. He made his first hole in one. He belongs to a private course in New England. And you have to have bar insurance for the hole in one because everybody in the club gets a drink, and everybody, you're not ordering, a domestic American beer. They're ordering like top shelf stuff. So you get absolutely soaked for that. People have insurance for that very reason. And he coincidentally made I think it was 7th hole. Right, our hole in ones were right around the same time. He beat me by a month or 2. And what's kind of cool about it, even though I welcome all my friends to make a hole in one, and I hope I get to witness. It's the first time I ever witnessed a hole in one, even though I quasi witnessed it. I have a lot of friends I play golf with. My brother plays golf, and my closest friends back east, my roto buddies. We have these golf trips we go on every year. And some players are around my ability, some players I'm better than. There's plenty of people better than me, but most of my friends don't have a hole in one. And the door's open. Come on in. And by the way, I'm all ears for your hole in one story if you have one.
Oh, I came close. I came within 6 inches once. It was about the tee was really elevated, so it's just kind of like it was 100 yards. So basically just took out a pitching wedge, came out, ball went up, and all of a sudden it started boop 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 boop. And my buddy that I was golfing with, he's like, "Oh my God, that could be a hole in one," and it just ended up tapping. That was as close as I've gotten. And hey, I'm playing on Friday, so hopefully maybe I'll have a story then. So
nice.
I'll send you a picture if it happens.
When the pandemic hit and the world was shutting down, and there was just you really couldn't do a lot of the things that we normally would do in our routines, and very difficult time. In fact, I had an unbelievable golf trip playing with my friends that we had to postpone for a year. And I just said, well, I'm going to practice as much as I can, in part to get out of the house and to get in the fresh air and to do something that felt safe because I'm not really around anybody else. I played a lot of golf that year. and did a lot of practicing. And also, one kind of sneaky thing, if somebody is looking to improve their game, and again, look, whatever, at best, I may have gotten down to like a 12.5 or a 13 handicap. I'm certainly, there are plenty of people better than me. So I don't want to come from a point of, oh, I'm the heir to the Nicholas throne or something, because I'm not. But one thing that improved my game a lot, other than practicing and learning to really get into the process and, the little things, get better with chipping and stuff like that. But I bought a golf watch a few years ago, just to give me the distances. It's not, there are more fancy versions of what I got. I got a nice Garmin watch. It's certainly nice, but it does a lot of things that I actually don't ask it to do. I'm basically just saying, hey, I just want to know two things. I thought I wanted to know one thing, which is, okay, what's the distance, front, middle, back of the green? What is it to that bunker? What is it to that pond? All that stuff. But the watch will also tell you how far you hit your last shot. And so what it's enabled me to do over the last few years is get, and this, I haven't really done this year because I haven't played enough, but when I start getting into a regular routine of playing, I can tell you exactly how far I'm hitting all my clubs, within a reasonable dispersion. And so what I found out after I got the watch is I started really coming close to these hole-in-ones. I started getting a lot of kick-in birdies. And a lot of twos on par threes, because now I knew exactly what I had to hit to I got my numbers down, I got locked in on them. So if you're looking for a way to improve and you think, well, I can't afford lessons, I can't go to the range that much, I'm telling you, if you just get a watch or an app, there's plenty of apps that would do this too. One of the biggest things you can do in golf, I would say two things that everybody can do that will make you a lot better at golf. It helped me a lot. One is to practice the short game more than you probably do. I think people who practice, they think, okay, I'm going to go and hit 1 million drivers and hit 1 million wedges and 1 million 8-irons and all that stuff. And that, your swing's important, but find a place where you can chip and putt. Yep. And it's, especially at the level that I'm at, I'm going to miss more greens than I hit. That's always going to be the case. And getting up and down, or even just also, sometimes when you're close to the green, just get the next shot on the green. And then two putt. If you get up and down, that's great, but just don't waste any shots. Advance the ball every shot. Don't dub a chip. I mean, sometimes you will, but Harvey Penick, the great golf coach, he was Ben Crenshaw's coach at famous Masters, where Crenshaw went to eulogize Harvey Penick, and then he wins the Masters like 3 days later. It's the year before the Faldo, Greg Norman Masters, and the year after that was Tiger. Anyway, Harvey Penick said that everybody wants to take the driver out or hit the long clubs and go to the range and beat balls, and people should be chipping and putting at least as much as they do those other stuff, if not more so. So if you focus more on the short game, that's going to help you. You're going to see improvement so quickly too. And if you get something that can help you calibrate your clubs, it could be a watch, it could be an app, but you need to have a reasonable idea of how far you hit your 7-iron or your 9-iron or your 7 hybrid or whatever it is. That's going to really improve your game. So this is why I know, of course, why you turned on to the show is you want, okay. So this guy who's hoping to break 90 the next time he plays, who has one lucky hole-in-one, is all of a sudden rewriting Golf My Way by Jack Nicklaus. Okay. Thank you. Well, there you go.
Oh man. It's like Ted Williams, the book on hitting and
sure. Science of Hitting. Yeah, Wade Boggs' favorite book.
Yes, exactly. Oh yeah, man. Well, this is a good one. So I want to, speaking of multiple sports, I'm often fascinated. I asked Andy Behrens this question a while back, and I'd love to ask you. When you're creating fantasy football, baseball. I know you do hockey too. What is the key for you in being able to dip your toe into all those different ones and still give effective advice?
Well, first of all, I hope I'm giving effective advice. I know that I'm giving good advice for football and baseball. The other sports, I do some hockey. It's not a ton, but I have a lot to do with the preparation of the Yahoo fantasy game and the original ranks and stuff. And I put as much work into the segment of time they give me to do that. But it's not, I can't say even though I'm a fan and I'm grinding the Bruins in the playoffs and petrified they're going to blow another 3-1 lead. They just lost Game 5 in overtime to Toronto. It's just eerily reminiscent of what we went through last year as Bruins fans, although the expectations are totally different. Now we're just like, well, it'd be nice if they lasted to a second round. I hate the matchup against Florida, who I feel like is a much better team, but I follow the NHL as a fan and I play fantasy, but I am not, if somebody said, okay, who's the third line for the San Jose Sharks right now, I couldn't tell you that. Where any fantasy football analyst, knows all the NFL depth charts, or any player that's relevant to be drafted. We know the closer for every baseball team and the second line, the third line, stuff like that, because you need to know that stuff. I do not go as deep with that with maybe my NHL knowledge. I did some really fun March Madness stuff with Frank Schwab.
Oh yeah.
And that's a cram session for me, because I'm watching probably 8 to 12 schools really closely, maybe a couple of different conferences. I went to Providence, so I'm following the Big East. Providence has had some pretty good teams in the recent years. Watch a lot of Big Ten basketball, watch a lot of ACC basketball. But when I need to write about Samford, I couldn't be like, okay, I can tell you they're 5 men, they're 7-man rotation and who their best free throw shoot. I that was a cram session for me, and a lot of Ken Palm and a lot of trying to play catch up. But it all comes down to this, Jorge. There are some people in our industry who do one sport. Right now, Matt Harmon is kicking ass doing football work phenomenal. At Yahoo, and his walk up. He's on vacation, I believe, right now, and man, did he deserve it after that 17-month NFL draft preview, or at least it felt like that. I am glad that Matt's doing it for us, and I think I'm going to be on the football pod with him next week, and I'm looking forward to that because it's been a while since we've had a talk on air. But I don't want to cover one sport, and I'm glad they haven't asked. I mean, obviously, I'm thrilled to be in the employ of Yahoo Sports, and at one point they said we want you to focus on football all the time or baseball all the time or whatever. I'm going to say yes, but I'm so glad I've been able to do some hockey, been able to do some March Madness, college basketball. Occasionally, I've done some golf pieces. I like just about every sport. I'm not a big, auto racing guy. I'm not against it, but I don't know much about it. I guess I don't know much about the Tour de France. I don't follow tennis the way I used to. At one point, I played a lot of tennis, and I would watch all the majors, and all my friends, we all had different, one person was a Sampras guy, one person was an Agassi guy, one person was a McEnroe guy. And, I don't really follow tennis the way I used to. I don't think the sport is as aesthetically pleasing, with maybe the exception of Roger Federer when he was still playing. He just fought fabulous to watch him, but I don't enjoy the game as much today as I used to. But I'm just thrilled that Yahoo gives me different things to do, and there's a menu I can order off, and sometimes I want a steak, sometimes I want a piece of chicken, sometimes I want a salad. I'm just glad I can order off the whole menu, because that just makes life a lot more interesting to me. So it's like anything, if you're interested in something, you're going to want to research it. You're going to want to learn about it. And, that's always kind of been the way I was wired. When I grew up, I'm old enough that I predate the internet and everything. When I grew up, if you were interested in something, you went to the library. You looked it up on the card catalog or the encyclopedias, right? I used to go into the school library and the town library and look up old Sports Illustrated issues on microfilm and microfiche. I don't know the difference between microfilm and microfiche. They're just similar things, but they're these tiny little slides, because I wanted to read old articles about Bill Walton, or I was fascinated by history that I was alive for, but I wasn't really aware of, like Bill Walton's entire relevant career at UCLA. And then with Portland, I missed all that. I was just too young. So I was just fascinated to read about him, or fascinated to read about Nicholas, or fascinated to learn about Pete Rose. Although the more you got to know Pete Rose, the less you liked him. So that to me, if I was ever interested in something, I remember we had these Trivial Pursuit cards. We had this baby boomer edition, which was like all 50s and 60s and 70s trivia. And you're like, oh, what was Patty Hearst all about? And what was the Vietnam conflict really about? And the rock music changing, the Beatles coming over, and the British invasion and all that stuff. And then the Beatles break up, and all those great bands in the 70s, and Fleetwood Mac, all this internal strife when they put out this unbelievable album despite everybody not getting along. And that all this stuff was fascinating to me. And when I would get interested in something, like the Who was the first band I loved. I just went out and got all the Who records and played them into the ground. Records, albums, and we had to actually turn the thing over, and you actually played it in the order it was presented to you. That's a very long-winded answer, but to me, I don't know. I just like a lot of different things interest me. I mean, when I'm bored at night, if I can't sleep, I'll read Dan Jenkins talking about an old golf tournament in Sports Illustrated, or I'll rewatch the 95 Masters, or, watch golf videos, or I just watched last night when I couldn't sleep. I watched a documentary they did, 30-year retrospective, I think it was, on the Big Chill and Lawrence Kasdan. And it's funny, 'cause somebody asked me about best soundtracks. I didn't include the Big Chill on that, but I could have. It was definitely also receiving votes. But one of the famous hooks of the Big Chill is that Kevin Costner had his first notable role in that movie, and then it was a flashback scene. He was only going to be in the movie for maybe 10 minutes, supposed to close the movie, and Kasdan at the last second realized that the scene didn't work, and the movie needed to end with that scene completely cut. So other than Kevin Costner's hairline in the movie, he's basically completely washed, scrubbed from it. Kasdan did make it up to him. He put him in one of his feature films shortly after, and of course Kevin Costner's career skyrocketed in the later in the 80s. And then he's made a bunch of great sports movies as well. Tin Cup is really good. Bull Durham is classic, maybe the best sports movie ever. Yeah, Bull Durham's so good. Kevin Costner's a really likable actor. But yeah, I couldn't sleep last night, so I did what any red-blooded male would do. I watched a Big Chill documentary. That's just the way I'm wired. I'm just curious about stuff, and I like to, if I care about something, I want to like tear it apart. I want to know all the nuances. I want to know, if I love a movie, I want to know what were the casting, what ifs. One of the things that sparked my interest in the Big Chill, which I've seen a million times anyway, is I was recently re-listening to the Rewatchables podcast, which is a really enjoyable podcast that Ringer does with it's usually with Bill Simmons, Chris Ryan, and the gem of that podcast to me is Sean Fennessy, who's an amazing encyclopedic knowledge of film, and he's not at all pretentious about it, and it's very difficult to hold those two things together. But I've been listening. It's a really long podcast. I wasn't able to do it all in one sitting because I listen to pods in the car a lot. I probably should have saved it for a flight, but I'm just at this point now, even though I already know like 98% of, like, I even have a Big Chill script. I bought it online. I just wanted to see the nuances of how the characters were scripted out. So really long-winded answer. I'm going to try to get, I think I write efficiently. I don't think I podcast efficiently at all, and that's a problem sometimes. But if I'm interested, if I'm interested in something, I just delve into it. When I got interested in golf, I just threw myself into it. Maybe I should be better for all the time I've spent. I don't really know about that, but limited athletic ability, I guess. But if I'm interested in something, I just throw myself into it. And when I'm interested in a movie, I want to know everything about it. I want to know who I'm at a point now where, like, I have so much respect for, I think is it Allison Jones, who's a famous casting agent, that I can see movies or TV shows sometimes and think, oh yeah, that Allison Jones must have done the casting. I'm trying to remember if I have that name right. It's the person who did the casting for The Office. I'm going to look it up to make sure. Is it Allison Jones?
That name sounds
The
familiar.
Office. Anyway, Allison Jones is her name. She's amazing. She does the casting for Curb Your Enthusiasm. She did. I think of how well The Office is cast, right? How could anybody else be Creed? Could anybody else be Kevin? Could anybody else be Stanley? Anyway.
I mean, everybody. I mean, Steve Carell. I mean, it was. I mean, we've seen the British version of The Office, and Ricky Gervais is great, but Steve Carell just owned that Michael Scott character.
Carell is legendary, and I think actually, as much as I love the secondary and tertiary characters on The Office, I do think that once Carell was out, I think it would have been a good time to get out soon after. But the Warehouse guys, Daryl, incredible character. Roy was well developed. I don't know anybody who doesn't think Creed is hilarious. David Wallace is a fantastic character. That show is so good.
Oh man, this is awesome. Well, hey, let's jump into a little football talk real quick.
Why not?
Well, first, do you have a couple favorite landing spots from the NFL draft?
I think everybody loves Marvin Harrison Jr. going to Arizona, where it's easy to tell yourself a story that he's going to be peppered with targets. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how good I think Kyler Murray is, but he's certainly not bad. And his upside is maybe he's a star/MVP candidate. And if he doesn't hit that high end of his range, maybe he's just more closer to a league average quarterback, but certainly not a bad quarterback. Just need him to be healthy. And there's a nice mix of, they have other pieces there, but they're not going to keep from Harrison being at the top of the food chain, which is you want a little bit of protection where it's not everybody can key on you, but you still want to be the heavy targeted guy. Now, the problem with Harrison is that everybody's going to want him. He's the shiny new toy.
Yeah.
And people are talking about he's going to. I think Dalton Del Don, our colleague at Yahoo, is talking about him as maybe being a first round pick. And I think the early drafts show Harrison being commonly in the first, second round turn in a lot of leagues. But he may go in the first round, and that's a little bit too expensive for me probably. But he was the one that jumped out, that he landed in a great spot. Now, obviously, Andy Behrens has written about this extensively, and I don't know how recently you spoke to Andy, but Caleb Williams, just a very unusual situation where when you're the number one pick in a draft and you're a quarterback, you're usually going to a nightmare team. And
I mean, think of Troy Aikman, who became a Hall of Famer somehow, but after getting his head beat in.
Oh my God!
So many guys like that
got the snot kicked out of him. What they won one game that year, I want to say,
and he didn't start that game,
right? And he was winless as his first year, and what a strange career he had. I mean, he goes to Oklahoma, and they want him to run the wishbone. And finally, he's like, "Hey, this isn't working for me." And then he had to ask, I think, Barry Switzer to let him out of his scholarship. I think that's how it went. And he ended up going to UCLA. This is back at a very different time in college football, where the stats in the game would not be recognizable to how they play today. Obviously, the NFL has steered into passing too, but the change in college, where you think of what Oklahoma used to be, Barry Switzer would be like, okay, there's 3 things that can happen on a pass, and 2 of them are bad. We're going to run the ball as much as possible. I remember Billy Sims won the Heisman. He left Oklahoma, I want to say, with like 5 or 6 catches in his Oklahoma career. It may be fewer than that. It was some ridiculously low number. And then he goes to Detroit, and he was a great receiver for the Lions. Oklahoma had no reason to ever want to throw the ball. Just hand it to Sims and let him run through teams. And that's pretty much what he did when he was there. But Caleb goes to Chicago. DJ Moore's terrific. I don't know what Keenan Allen has left, but he's still at least a quality player. They have other pieces. They've upgraded the offensive line. They draft an impact receiver themselves. It's a highly unusual situation where the number one, and look, I know there's debates on how good Caleb Williams is. Runaway Heisman winner, backslides last year, little bit, sometimes I think thin skin. He was talking about the media kind of getting in his business. Southern California, the Chicago media is going to get in his business a lot more than the SoCal media will, but he's landing. I mean, he's landing in this brand new SUV. This team, and this team was on the upswing last year anyway. They could easily be a version of what the Lions were this year, with a team that's really ready to maybe take a step forward. If Caleb's ready, why couldn't they win 10 or 11 games this year? And Williams could be, I would think, a QB1 right away. So I'm not sure. Frank Schwab and I, the great Yahoo NFL writer, we were talking today about, he said, which of the 6 quarterbacks do you think is most likely to bust? And a hard question for me to answer. I'm not sure. I think they all have upsides and downsides, pluses and minuses. Obviously, Daniels is coming off a Heisman Trophy career of his own, but he's more, I think he's further advanced as an athlete than he is as a quarterback. He does remind me a lot of Lamar Jackson. Now, Lamar Jackson's turned into a fabulous player. He's won a couple of MVPs. He's an electric runner, as Daniels is as well. But I don't know. I maybe Washington has burned me a little bit with their offensive infrastructure in the last few years, and obviously they had the horrible ownership that's finally turned over. It's going to be interesting. My Patriots took Drake May, who I recently found. I didn't realize Luke May was his brother, the North Carolina sharpshooter. It's a very athletic family. His father was a football player, and there's just a bunch of talented kids there. Kind of like the Hughes family, how they're taking over the NHL, and what a fun story that is. But May. I asked Frank, and I'm curious what you think of this, Jorge. Turns out the Patriots were offered, I think, a good offer from the Giants to trade down, and I think a great offer from the Vikings to trade down. And I asked Frank, I said, should the Patriots have done one of those trades? And he said, well, it just comes down to, if you're convinced May is the guy, you got to take May. And I've seen May comp to so many different people. Josh Allen, good. Justin Herbert, good. Mitch Trubisky, not good, although maybe they're forcing the UNC connection. And I've also seen a Sam Howell comp. I think that's just because they both went to North Carolina. I don't think they don't remind me at all. I mean, May's so much taller. I think he's got bigger hands. He's just more of a, the Sam Howell experience was kind of crazy last year. He led the NFL in pass attempts. So we saw a lot of Sam Howell. We probably won't see much more of Sam Howell. He'll be a backup the rest of his career. And there's no shame in that. But I don't look at Drake May and see Sam Howell. But Bo Nix had a weird career. It's such a different time in college football now, with the transfer portal and guys stay in college longer. Penix, comes out a couple of years later than most people will, and now he goes to a situation. I don't get that. I know people are split on this. Some people are like, oh, maybe Atlanta's like, new school. They're following the Green Bay playbook. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to sign somebody to a gigantic deal and then basically walk it halfway back 6 weeks later. I think you need to pick a lane. If you thought Penix was the guy, then fine. Find a way to get Michael Penix. That's fine. If you thought Cousins was, the guy to put you in the playoffs and make you relevant, fine. Then, build the best team you can around Kirk Cousins while he's still relevant. I don't think having both of them makes a lot of sense, but ultimately,
because they still needed pieces too. They need pieces on defense. They could have used maybe another receiver, but I mean, I think for fantasy, it's great. It's great that we get Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson basically as the three guys that are going to be the main targets. But yeah, I mean, from a football standpoint, they could have used more. They could have used more. A player that's not going to sit for ideally for them, because that means they're getting a return on their investment from Kirk Cousins. I wanted to say Kirk Gibson for a second. I don't know why.
But anytime you want to start talking about 1988, I'm here. I'll tell you another thing.
I've got a good story for you. It's off camera.
Another one of my, can't sleep. When I was growing up, my idol in like broadcasting / sports was Bob Costas. I thought Costas was just the most eloquent person, intelligent, witty, a little sarcastic, unbelievable points of reference. And then later in his career, he got close to Mickey Mantle when Mantle was sick. Mantle dies. Bob Costas eulogizes Mickey Mantle, and it's a lovely. If you don't get goosebumps during that eulogy, you better go to your doctor and say my heart has stopped working. And then he also eulogized Stan Musial in a lovely way and told some great stories about Musial. So I have listened to a lot of times I've just done searches for Bob Costas, some of his later programs that are on YouTube. I wish more of them were on YouTube, but he was an excellent interviewer. Plus he had the clout to pull excellent guests. And I've heard a lot of his different podcast appearances. I've heard a lot of the same stories, him breaking in with minor league hockey and the league that was based on Slapshot and all that stuff. I've heard a lot of the story. At this point, if I ever interview Costas, I'm so ready to do it because I know all this back stuff. I know they called him Costy at Syracuse, and some of his KMOX stories when he broke in St. Louis. But Costas, the great story of he is in the dugout in '88, and Gibson is not going to play. He tells NBC it looks like Gibson's out for tonight, and Gibson's like, the hell with that. I'm going to play. I'm gonna. He's in the locker room or in the batting cage, underneath the stadium, and he's like thwack, and he's like grunting after each thwack because he's in so much pain. And I remember baseball did a greatest moment of the last 50 years or 100 years or all time or something. A credit card company did a promotion on that. And they ultimately picked Cal Ripken the day that he broke the Lou Gehrig record, 2,131, I guess it was. And look, that's an amazing accomplishment. And obviously, Gehrig is, almost like a mythical character at this point. Yeah, for all the stuff he went through and the way his life, the arc of his life and the tragic way it ended and all that stuff. I mean, Lou Gehrig's story speaks for itself. He's just one of those guys, is one of one. Ripken eclipsing that, amazing. I still think Ripken there's a little bit of maybe selfishness where he had to play every inning and he get a little frosty when they take him out for a pinch runner and stuff like that. But I mean, Cal Ripken was an unbelievable baseball player. Everybody can see that. But to me, Jorge, I mean, as long as I've been a baseball fan and a sports fan, the Gibson moment stands alone. Dennis Eckersley was untouchable. Kirk Gibson couldn't walk. He looked about as bad as you could look during some of that at bat. I mean, he looked overmatched. Somehow, Mike Davis, I guess, got on base with a walk, I want to say. And, Eckersley walked one guy a month.
He walked 4 guys all season.
Yeah. And he won another. One reason why I love the Gibson homer so much, and I wasn't invested in it. I wasn't a Dodger fan, although as I got later in life, the Dodgers became a go-to for me because Vin Scully is just I mean, he makes Bob Costas sound like a stutterer and a stammerer. Just how great Vin Scully was. It's just amazing to talk about one of one. I miss him so much. I just loved to turn. It still ticks me off that the broadcasting rights were all screwed up at the end of Vin Scully's career, when they basically should have been giving everybody Vin Scully for free for this victory lap, and I just, that doesn't sit well with me. But
real quick, I don't know if you remember this, but when we met, it was at the King's Classic. It was right after Vin had passed away, and you gave me just a really, really, nice condolence on that. And I was just, that's when I immediately knew, okay, this guy's gonna be a compadre. So
yeah, for sure. Oh, Vin's amazing. It's so difficult to do what he does. I can't talk about him in the past tense. I have to talk about Vin Scully like he's still here. But anyway, Eckersley is untouchable, and the Dodgers, ragtag team. The really good documentary MLB Network did on that season. I think it was Only in Hollywood, I think they called it. Where Gibson comes over and Jesse Roscoe plays the joke with the eye black on his hat. Gibson gets all mad, and they had just this disheveled lineup. Somehow got past a really good Mets team in the NLCS, but the A's looked like a juggernaut. Unbeatable juggernaut. Eckersley at the peak of his powers, and Gibson, even the swing, it's not a pretty swing. It's just a swing of. I feel like Kirk Gibson did not have another swing to offer. Like if for some reason he was ahead of that pitch and he fouled it off, I think that was like it. I think he would just meekly struck out on the next pitch. And then he's going around the bases, and Costas always talks about Harry Coyle, the director, how they got the shots just right, and they show Gibson, you jerking his arm in a certain way, and just the raw emotion. He didn't have another at bat the entire series. Gibson. It's interesting that Gibson was always. I always thought he was kind of a pain in the neck when he played, and he played baseball like a wide receiver, which he was at Michigan State. He was a really. There was just something visceral about him, and something he'd kind of violently connect with the ball. But I realize now that there's a guy I should have appreciated more in the moment, but I certainly appreciated that moment. And a very long-winded way of saying that if somebody says to me, what's the greatest baseball moment you've lived through? And I look, the 2004 Red Sox, that comeback, and it's tied to my grandfather on his deathbed, basically watching Game 4 with me, ALCS. I'll never forget that. That's the most personal story for me. But what's the greatest moment in the recorded baseball history that I've seen? I think Gibson home run is, and there's been some unbelievable moments. The Joe Carter home run, the Kirby Puckett game, Jack Morris, that Game 7 is an amazing moment. And again, that Red Sox comeback in 2004, the collectiveness of that is incredible. That Cubs Indians Game 7 was incredible. But it's still it's like Gibson is in its own stratosphere, and then everything else is fighting for second.
So I actually got to interview Gibson about that year and that day. And he told me an inside story where before the scouting report, the scout said to him, he said, he looked at him straight in the eye and said, "Partner, sure as I'm standing here, you get Eckersley into a 3-2 count. He's giving you that backdoor slider." And Gibson, that you were talking about the grunting and everything like that. Well, he told the bat boy is still with the Dodgers now. He's his name is Mitch Poole. He told him, go tell Tommy that if he's gonna hit Mike Davis, I can pinch. If Davis gets on, I'll hit for Anderson. And Mitch was not allowed in the dugout. So he had to kind of like be on the periphery at the edge of the hall, the long tunnel leading up to the dugout. And he's like, Tommy. Tommy's like probably about 50 feet from him.
Yeah.
Tommy looks at him with that Italian death stare, look of disdain, like, the hell are you doing? I'm managing a World Series game right here.
Like somebody just asked him about Kingman's performance, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mitch says to him, Gibby says he can hit. So all of a sudden the wheels turn really quickly. He goes, tell him to stay back there until I call him. Why? Because he didn't want La Russa to see that he was on the bench.
Right.
Davis gets on. He says, and Gibby just comes out, and he said he didn't even look at anybody. He just walked through the dugout, just went straight to the on deck circle as his name was being announced over the stadium speaker. He gets in, does his little thing. When he got the 3-2, there's that moment where he calls for timeout. So at that moment, he's staring at Eckersley, and in his mind, he's staring at Eckersley and said, "Partner, sure as I'm standing here, you get Eckersley in a 3-2 pitch, 3-2 count. He's giving you that backdoor slider." And then Gibby says in his mind, "Begin." Steps in, history. So it's
I love all of it.
when he told it to me, my ear, the hair on my head, it was standing up.
I can still hear Vin Scully say, "And look who's coming up." And as you said, Gibson was not in the dugout. The report from Costas and Lasorda has always credited Costas partially tongue in cheek, and I know Tommy Lasorda has passed too. I still feel like he's just somebody who's just going to live to be 212. So I'm going to pretend Tommy Lasorda is still with us. I watched the Baseball Bunch, for crying out loud, when I was a kid. Dugout Wizard. Not the greatest show in the world, but whatever. When you're a baseball,
it worked.
Yes, when you're 9 or 11 or whatever I was, and Johnny Bench was a likable guy and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I watched all that, but Lasorda gives credit to Costas for, I think at one point I think it was in the World Series. It might have been the NLCS, but I think it was the World Series, where maybe one of the games in Oakland with the Dodgers, for different reasons, Gibson's not available. Maybe some other people weren't available. And Bob Costas is like, this is certainly one of the weakest lineups a World Series team has put forward. He said something like that, which is, if he doesn't say that, he's not doing his job. And so Lasorda just uses that he just sells this team out. Like, Costas doesn't give us a freaking chance. And, Tommy, I mean, he played on emotion. He bled Dodger blue. And, the great joke that Greg Nettles had about those Dodger Yankee rivalry games, 77, 78, 81, the World Series, is he said the key to beating the Dodgers was to keep them from hugging each other. Nettles, by the way, said a ton of funny things. Go read Sparky Lyle's Bronx Zoo, or read Nettles' book himself, Balls, and you get some of that. But one of my favorite players, I can't believe he's not in the Yankees, whatever, Monument Park, whatever. I know him and Steinbrenner didn't always get along, and Greg left the team kind of on bad terms, but that does not make sense. I mean, did you know, by the way, Greg Nettles has the most position player WAR of any American League player in the 70s. Now, the part of that is a loaded stat, because you'd have to play your career would have to fall right. You'd have to be in one league and all that. And I know WAR is not a perfect approximation, and a lot of people don't trust the defensive metrics, which I always loved Nettles, but he was an underrated player. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. If he was in the Hall of Fame, I wouldn't have a problem with that. And the fact that the Yankees don't have him in their Hall of Fame, I think, is grossly wrong. I'm going to try to steer this back to the modern day. I just want to say one final thing about Gibson and about Eckersley. Talk about the hair standing on the back of my head or back of my neck. The way Eckersley handled that, answered all the questions, owned the moment. It obviously shifts. I know a lot of people don't believe in momentum, but I mean, that's serious. If Eckersley strikes out Gibson, I firmly believe, I will believe for the rest of my life, that Oakland would have won the World Series, and probably easily. And that's just a huge inflection point. And a lot of athletes would want to answer questions. They'd duck it. They'd get snippy. Eckersley took all the heat, owned it, and then when retrospectives would come up, would participate and shared the moment with Gibson and gave Gibson the credit. And look, Dennis Eckersley, he's had a fascinating life. He's had marriages, he's had divorces, he had a much talked about alcohol problem. One reason I always loved Eckersley is I grew up reading the great Boston Globe sports section, and Peter Gammons was, I talk about Costas being my idol, but really my first idol was Peter Gammons. Growing up, being all my baseball friends, we all wanted to meet Peter Gammons, be friends with Peter Gammons, work with Peter Gammons, or do some, cheap imitation of Peter Gammons, because none of us were even daring enough to dream that we could be like an equal to this guy. His Sunday notes were, back when I just wanted to know stuff. I wasn't playing fantasy baseball. It didn't even exist as far as I was concerned. I just wanted to know as much as I could about whoever he was interested in, and not just the athletes. If he was interested in Warren Zevon, I was interested in Warren Zevon. If he was interested in Neil Young, I was interested in Neil Young. His columns were so full of subtle references. It never felt like he was trying too hard. And he was a good guy who could still be critical. Gammons I loved. And he used to tell a story about Eckersley when the Red Sox were in the process of blowing their big lead in 1978. And there's a game where I think the Yankees ran all over them. It was a 4-game series. The Boston Massacre was like a 42-11 composite score for the 4 games, something in that neighborhood. I don't have the numbers exactly right. Eckersley pitched in a game in that series. There's an infielder, I don't remember the infielder's name off the top of my head, who made an error, and the inning snowballed, and the press was going to get all over this infielder. And Eckersley said, "Hey, I'm the pitcher. I'm the guy who walked the next 2 batters, or I'm the guy who couldn't get out of the inning. Talk to me. It's on me." And totally absolved his teammate from getting pasted by the media. And Gammons never forgot that. He always just wrote up Eckersley as a stand-up guy. That's perfectly illustrated in the way Eckersley handled the Gibson thing. And when there was a run-in between David Price and the announcer, Dennis Eckersley, Gammons retold all those stories. Like, Dennis, he's like, Price was like, "Oh, Eckersley doesn't know what it's like to fail," or all this. I don't know exactly what Price said, but it was of that vein. And Gammons like, "Well, I saw Dennis Eckersley fail, and I saw him face the music. I saw the guy have his, marriage breakup. I saw the guy have a drinking problem. I saw the guy have his career just about be over and reinvent himself. I saw this guy have the most difficult moment to handle with that home run and handle it with grace and class and respect for his opponent. I don't know. Dennis Eckersley, man, Peter Gammons, these are my heroes."
Oh man, gosh. So many guys would have gone into a shell if they had done that. And he became how many closers have we seen over the last 40, 50 years who've been great and like had something happen, and then they were great, and then the next year they were not great. Bobby Thigpen, Mark Davis, so many guys.
Eric Gagne won the Cy Young Award, and then a few years later, he was basically, out of baseball.
Yeah, I mean, he was, and so you look at that, and like he goes on and has a Hall of Fame career, just as a closer. No, I think and the way he's owned everything and just been kind of like a compatriot to Gibby. I think he always and forever gets a hat tip from me, not just for serving up that backdoor slider, which the ball has never been found. No one is that someone got the ball and left. I knew a woman who was working in the pavilion that day, and she said she saw a guy get up and just like hit the stairs and leave, but never got it authenticated, and no one has ever come forward with that ball.
Talk about the goosebumps. I swear this is the last we'll talk about Kirk Gibson. unless we do an impromptu ranking of Michigan State wide receivers, and then I'll have to reopen everything. Fly ball to right field. She is gone. The perfect call by Scully. I love the fact that he calls the home run ball she in the moment.
That's the only time I've ever heard him do that too, by the way.
Right. It just felt right. It's the genius of Vin Scully. It's not a gimmick. He doesn't have a home run call. Some of these guys force home run calls. Some of ESPN guys force their home run call, or I think Michael Kay is a fine announcer, but that whole see you thing feels a little bit contrived to me. You're better than that, Michael Kay. Just she is gone, lays out, silence, and then the Harry Coyle direction and the NBC broadcast takes over. The visual tells the story. I mean, Vince Scully describing the Buckner play, right? Just a little dribble up first period. It gets through Buckner. And I was a Red Sox fan. They were everything to me. Here comes night, and the Mets win it. I could hear that in my sleep. And the Mets win it. And the Mets win it. How did they get 3 runs? They had nothing going on and hit a couple of dribblers and then a wild pitch and then a ground ball up for all of a sudden they had 3 runs. I'd never seen something fall apart so innocently the way that did. And again, I'll get us back on topic, but Costas tells the great story of they had all the plastic wrap set up in the Red Sox locker room, and he was going to interview Jean Yaki. She was the widow of the former owner.
Oh, yeah.
And he said the efficiency to which everything got torn. And he's like, "What do I do when the game got tied?" And they said, "Get out of there." And he said he could not believe how quickly they dismantled all that, because they were set up. They were going to have the champagne parade and douse everybody and all that scene. And all of a sudden, everything went wrong. And he said he couldn't believe how quickly they tore it all down.
Amazing. Oh my goodness. We could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to pick up my kids at some point, but
they have Uber, right? They have Uber.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I did ask, but no, it's good. I wanted to jump back to fantasy football.
Of course.
kind of every year kind of brings with those lessons. And I think right now that we're kind of past everything and the teams are kind of formed and, the main free agents are signed. Of course, we're going to find somebody who signs right on Labor Day weekend and scores 12 touchdowns and gets 1,000 yards. But is there any lesson from last season that you're exploring for the coming months that maybe that could formulate a strategy for next season?
I'll say this isn't directly tied to last year, and maybe it's a bad example because one of the key players last year was Raheem Mostert, age 31 season.
Yeah.
But one thing you mentioned, the Ibanez All-Stars earlier, which was a baseball theory of mine, the boring value veterans who are not buzzy, who are not the players people go to the draft table to take. They're just boring values who give you Joseph Adai was a good example of that for football. Yeah. Adam Thielen was like that for a long time. It's like, oh no, he's not even the best receiver on his own team. Adam Thielen's not that good. And it's like, well, wait a minute. He's unbelievable in space. And they design plays, which are basically called Adam Thielen catches a 7-yard touchdown. That's something that he does. And even last year on a horrible Carolina offense, Thielen still had some value well into his 30s. With all respect to that, and I love the Mostert story too, just an easy guy to like. I have tried to get younger with my fantasy drafting. Yeah. I'm still all about boring values. I don't mind that in and of, and I think you win a baseball league with an accumulation of good decisions. With football, you can win a football league if you strike lightning with like the right 2 or 3 things. So I've tried to be more open-minded to younger players, first contract players on the escalator, more sensitive to where they are in their career arc. And although I think it's a fool's errand to think like a Puka Nacua is going to come around every year or Devin Achane or something like that, I want to be more. I should have known more about Nacua. I was basically taking the crash course on Nacua after he had 27 catches on opening night. And then Matt and I were doing our Sunday night. Matt Harmon and I were doing a broadcast where we break down everything that just happened. And I was making sure I had Nakua's pronunciation right and stuff, and just double checking where he went to college. And I just didn't. He went late enough in the draft that I just didn't think knowing much about Puka Nacua was that important. And I'm embarrassed to say that on something that's going to be broadcast and recorded, but here we are. I think 2 things. I want to get younger with my drafting, and fully knowing that it's a mistake to think there's a Nacua out there hiding in plain sight. I think if nothing else, it just underscores that I need to know everybody who's even quasi in a team's rotation.
Yeah.
Well enough where it's like, okay, I gotta book up on this guy and try to come up with takes and come up with fab strategies. And, that I think I underestimated how relevant a player like that could be, fully out understanding it's an outlier, but that's not the point. I should have known, I should have been a couple of weeks ahead on Nacua. It doesn't mean I would have drafted him necessarily, but I feel like I was late to that. And that's something I don't want to get wrong this year.
No, I agree. Cause it's, I'm in LA and I read about Nacua, but I just kept thinking it's not going to happen. He's a rookie, but you know what? There are certain things and, speaking of Matt Harmon, ecosystems. So drink. And, when you see a good player who is starting to get some hype and is in a good coaching staff, is with a good coaching staff with a good quarterback, and just has all the elements there for success, that you got to at least take a flyer on him. So I love that. I love that mode of thinking. And you know what? And now he's being talked about as a 1st-round pick this year.
Let me ask you this about Nacua. This popped in my head today, and I've been meaning to bounce it off Schwab, who is like one of my go-tos whenever I have something I'm not sure about. And then I know you and I have texted about stuff like that too. And plus I know you're close to the LA situation. So it's always great to tap your mind on this. It just popped in my head today. What if Puka Nacua was drafted by somebody else? What if he was drafted by a team? Like, what if he was on the Panthers last year? Or what if he was on the Patriots last year? Or a team that didn't really know what was going on with their offense or didn't have a passing game to speak of? And this is one of the, I say this is the greatest thing and the worst thing about football debates, is that it's so difficult to separate a player's talent against the context and the players around him, the offensive line, the coaching staff, and all that stuff. And I just, it popped in my head today. What would Puka Nacua have been if he landed in a team that had an offense that was underwater? I'm curious what you think about that.
I don't think he would have been very good. I really think we would not be talking about him today as even uh, I, anything more than a guy you're drafting in the double digit rounds. Because one of the things that he got was he got a master's level education from Cooper Cup and also from Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, and you get him into an environment like that was not working in Carolina. Or, I mean, there would probably been about, I think he would have worked in Kansas City. I think he would have worked in Houston. I think might have even popped in Baltimore, especially by the second half of the season. I think I don't know if he would have popped in San Francisco just because of the other guys around him. But
too many people in front of him. Maybe Detroit.
Maybe I think Detroit would have been beautiful. Oh my goodness. I think he and Amon-Ra St. Brown would have made beautiful music together, and Laporta and everything like that. Andy Barron's drink.
By the way, I had no Laporta last year. I got over it because even though I'm a New England guy, I've been in Detroit for 2 decades. So I root for the teams. It's not where I grew up, so it's never going to be to the level of my Boston fandom. But you didn't like that Lions team last year. Something was wrong with you. They were such an easy team to like, and I just, I got over not rostering Laporta by picking him for DFS or putting a prop on him here or there, or just texting my friends every time he made a play. And I'd just be like, which he made a lot of plays, man. He was just so much fun. What a fun team that was. I have no idea where they're going with it this year, but what a fun team that was. But I agree with you on Nacua that just some teams, some ecosystems, some infrastructures, just, I mean, I think back to Randy Moss. Well, yeah. I still feel, someday I may feel differently, but I think best receivers ever, judging Super Bowl era onward. I didn't see Don Hudson play or anybody like that. I just don't know what to do with them. I think Jerry Rice still stands alone. Jerry Rice still might be the best football player I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I think Randy Moss is unquestionably in my mind. I mean, Terrell Owens was fantastic, and Marvin Harrison, fantastic, and the peak of Antonio Brown was fantastic, and Chris Carter was a Hall of Fame receiver, and Calvin Johnson was incredible. There's so many guys, but Randy Moss is the unquestionable number 2 for me. When he went to the Raiders, bad team, losing culture. Part of it was Randy, probably thinking, this isn't worth it. I'm not going to give my best for this team. But part of it was they just didn't have the pieces around them to the infrastructure to get Randy Moss to be, a guy who should score 12 to 15 touchdowns without breaking a sweat. And then when he goes to New England that next year, he scores 23, and they basically smashed the record book. That just underscores perfectly. Steve Young and the Buccaneers, it was a clown car. Steve Young on this is the 49ers. It's a walk-in, no doubt Hall of Famer. It's like, we got to get rid of Joe Montana because Steve Young's too good not to play. I realize, again, these are extreme examples, but we don't have to wonder, what if Steve Young went to a bad team? He did. He went to the worst team in football, and he looked like he'd never played football before, because that's how much context. And I'm not breaking anything new. We know football's a heavily context game. Baseball's so pure in stat analysis because it's batter versus pitcher. Yeah, there's some concert in baseball. The pitcher and catcher work together. The double play combination works together. But for the most part, baseball's a game of individual acts. Football, is a game of choreograph. It's a game of people working in concert, and and sometimes the Jenga piece, the wrong guy in the offensive line gets hurt sometimes, and an offense can collapse if it's that wrong glue guy, or even a lesser receiver can get hurt, and all of a sudden everybody struggles because they were setting up combination routes that enabled the featured receiver to maybe make the big play. There's so much in football that we don't see on the regular television screen, and even if I watch the All-22, which I do sometimes, I'm not Bill Walsh. I'm not Bill Belichick. I can only understand it on an intelligent fan writer level, but I didn't play football, and it's the one sport I didn't play any organized, version of. I just played it in the backyard. We tried to kill each other and all that stuff. Plenty fun, and thankfully I lived through it. Although I saw Phil Adams get his shoulder separated. What a crazy day that was. The things we would do, you throw the ball intentionally to somebody, and then everybody would gang tackle them. We thought that was fun when we were 11. I don't think it's really very fun now, but Randy Moss, context. Puka Nacua, this is all a thought exercise because he's still on the Rams, and thank God for that. He's still with Matthew Stafford. He's still with Cooper Kupp. He's still with McVay. And wasn't it just great to see McVay reinvigorated? He looked like a guy who maybe needed a year off, and it was just so much fun to see him, what he did with Williams, what he did with Puka. I thought last year I was telling everybody, avoid the Rams. Don't draft Cooper Kupp, especially. Now, the Kupp thing ended up being right, and I take no joy in that. But avoiding the Rams, talk about being 1,000% wrong.
It was, I mean, I kept thinking McVay's too good a coach, but I was thinking Cam Akers was going to be a value taken later. I had no Puka Nacua on teams where I could have fabbed him or anything like that. Where I could pick them late. No, Scott Fishbowl. I happened to be in a group with like 3 other Ram fans, and one of them scooped them up, and so it just I don't know if there's going to be someone who's going to do it on that level. Maybe a rookie does it like on a Tank Dell level that has some splash, and unfortunately he got hurt. But yeah. Puka Nacua was, I mean, how before him, how long had it been, I mean, it was a few years since Justin Jefferson, but he was a first-round draft pick, not a fifth rounder.
Yeah, the greatest, not the greatest, but the comp I have, and this is a loose comp because he was drafted a lot earlier, but I remember Anquan Bolden his rookie year. And I think he might have been a second or third round pick. I know he was briefly a quarterback in college, but he was not on the fantasy radar. Even though he probably should have been, given that he had a little bit of draft capital, but he had like a 200-yard game to start his career, something like that, maybe like 211 yards or something. And that's what Bill James would call signature significance. And you could argue that Nakua's first game had that too, that it's highly unlikely that somebody would produce stats like Jack Flaherty just had a 14 strikeout game for the Tigers a couple days ago. Anybody who has some level of talent might version of luck. Eric Gregg's behind the plate. You might strike out a bunch of guys one day. But if you strike out 14, you're probably really freaking good or something's working. In the case of Flaherty, I think all he needs to be a right answer in fantasy baseball this year is to stay healthy. And look, it's easier said than done in the current pitching environment. And it sure seems like he generates a lot of torque with some of those pitches. So as much as I think he's a fun pick, and I was happy to get him in the Friends and Family draft a few days ago. I didn't see a 14 strikeout game coming, but he's been great for 2 months now. I just hope he can stay healthy, which is the bottom line with every pitcher. But that's signature significance that you probably you have to be great probably to, like, anybody could throw 1 no-hitter. If you throw 2, you're probably great. And I realize, like Homer Bailey threw 2 no-hitters. Maybe he was good plus. Mark Burley threw 2 no-hitters. He was actually a really good pitcher. I don't know that he was ever great, but there are certain things that you can do that you have to probably be great to do certain things. And the signature significance tag applies. And that's probably how I hope I said signature significance when Nacua did what he did. Unfortunately, I didn't have him on any of my teams. Before that, I didn't have him on any of my teams 3 days later when waivers ran in Yahoo. So I got that one wrong. And you don't want to overcorrect. Somebody unknown every year in the NFL. Week 1, Kevin Ogletree, I think it was, one Thursday night had a couple of touchdowns. He basically wasn't heard from for the rest of the year. They talk about fantasy baseball. Steve Gardner loves to talk about Carl Tuffy Rhodes. He came over from Japan. He hit 3 home runs for the Cubs his first game, and he basically was never heard from again. He just that was the moment he had, and it was all a false corridor. But yeah,
my National League only league. Every year at our auction, there is a Tuffy Rhodes there is a Tuffy Rhodes reference, and I always point to my buddy who picked him. So we still give him a hard time.
I drafted him, and I was all excited after the 3 home runs, and it didn't. That was all there was to it. But I mean, that's what we do, right? We try to figure out what's real, what's signal, what's noise, and it's so hard. It's so 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. Drake May's been compared to Josh Allen. He's compared to the former UNC quarterbacks. I think I've been compared to Justin Herbert. The Patriots do not have great skill talent. They were offered a lot to trade down, but if you think, as I said earlier, if you think, Frank said, if you think May's the guy, you take him. Bo Nix was a different player at Auburn than he was when he changed schools.
Right.
Daniels had kind of an interesting up and down career. Penix is 2 years older than the average quarterback, and now he's not going to play. Sure does throw a pretty ball. I don't know. I wish I feel cheated because I want to watch Kirk Cousins play and I want to watch Michael Penix Jr. play, and we can't watch. They cannot exist in the same universe right now. And I think in a league where we need as many good quarterbacks as we can get, I want to see both of them play, and that can't exist. And in fact, they might even get in each other's way somewhat to divide the locker room, or what if Penix is fantastic in the preseason when Cousins likely won't play?
Right.
What do you do with that? I thought, and I'm curious what your thought. We haven't talked about this yet, and I think most people thought Atlanta did a curious thing. I have seen some people defend it, and some people I really respect. Kevin Cole is somebody who I really respect, and he was in favor of it. If I'm reading his comments right, we had a Twitter exchange about it. I just think in the salary cap and the way the flow of contracts and contract arcs, it doesn't make sense to have both those things on your roster. I don't think. And I realize there's been, the Packers have drafted their next quarterback when they already had a great one, but that's a little different when somebody's already in the house and you know what they are and everything. I know the Seahawks that 1 year they signed Matt Flynn to a good deal, but then they fell in love with Wilson, and then they were smart enough to just give the keys to Wilson that preseason. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Russell Wilson was, one of the best players in the league. It's just kind of sad what's happened in his career, but I think they screwed up. What say you?
I can't see how they could have picked him after giving so much money to Kirk Cousins. It boggles the mind. They needed so much else. They needed so much else on the team, and you want that when you sign a quarterback to that much money, you want that first round pick, a top 10 pick, to be on the field with him to help him win, and he's not. So that to me is maybe in 2 years it works. Maybe Michael Penix is the guy who erases the 28-3. I know that's a great day for you, but I know it's not a good day for Atlanta. But maybe he's the one who erases that history and takes him to the Super Bowl. But until that point in the near future, for the near future, for the 2024 season, I don't see how it works, because ideally for them, he doesn't play. And because that means Kirk Cousins is on the field and he's playing well, but that maybe there's one piece that could have helped them.
I mean, the salary cap makes you make choices. It's like if you gave your kids a certain amount of money to go out to a nice restaurant and have dinner, and if they order like 5 different appetizers, you're not going to have enough for a main course. You only get a certain amount of resources, and there's a reason. And I know people always complain when a good team, a playoff contending team, a Super Bowl contending team loses their quarterback. And like, why didn't you have a better backup? Because it doesn't make sense to what it would cost to have a good backup. It costs too much money and it screws up the cap, the opportunity cost. And so what's become a version of a good backup now is like Gardner Minshew or Jacoby Brissett. Right. And even those guys make pretty good money. Last year, the Falcons gave Heineke actually a pretty good contract for a backup. But it doesn't make sense to have basically 2 number 1 quarterbacks on your roster, and that's what they have. And my point was always, well, if you fell in love with Penix, and that's certainly nothing that happened after they signed Cousins, and they've already done all sorts of recon work on the draft. They had the 8th overall pick in a draft-heavy class, in a quarterback-heavy class. They knew they needed a quarterback, so it's not like this was the reveal was late, and that's why they reacted. I mean, of course, a lot of people make decisions on a football team. It's not just one guy. The different people in management are involved. The owner can be involved. It sure seems like the GM was trying to sell Arthur Blank on video. I will never know exactly what happened in that discussion, probably. But if you loved Penix, great, take him. And now if he's good, you get the advantage of paying less to your quarterback than most of the rest of the league. That's Seattle enjoyed that for years when Wilson was good right away, and when things were going well for the Chargers. They had Herbert on a rookie deal.
We're going to see that with Houston right now. With CJ Stroud.
For sure. What a story that was too. I mean, I liked CJ Stroud a year ago. I had no idea he had that in him. And now again, signature significance. I think that bandwagon got overflowing really quickly. It's like this guy is awfully good, and I liked him at Ohio State. I wouldn't say I loved him. I liked him. Let's put this way. if I had an inkling that Stroud was going to do that, then I would have been like, oh, let's have a long discussion about Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. And I'm like, okay, a young smaller, that makes me nervous. I preferred Stroud, but it wasn't like a pound the table. Let's write 1,500 words about it thing. I didn't think I was shocked at how ready he was to be an NFL star. I mean, just a great story. I hope Tank Dell heals up quickly, because that team with Nico Collins coming into his own, Tank Dell was terrific as a rookie. You would think, even with Diggs on the back nine, you would still think he's got a lot of good football, and he's motivated, new team. They have decent pieces otherwise. I mean, it's amazing how some teams can look like, oh, this is a multi-year rebuild, and then you get the coach right, you get the quarterback right. It's like, oh wow, we're in the playoffs first year. It was just so much fun to watch Houston be so far ahead of schedule, and mostly because they got those two decisions right.
No, exactly. I mean, I think, and that's going to be a fascinating team this year. Because I think they had a good draft. I think they're going to be. I think they're going to be a great football team and fun for fantasy. So
fun division too, right? I mean, Anthony Richardson be healthy again. Another thing I asked Schwab today. I'm curious where you come down on this. And I realize we're a long way from knowing, but we're trying to get ahead of this stuff.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence came to the league seen as like the next great quarterback, and he had moments. They did make the playoffs that one year. They had the big comeback against the Chargers. There was a lot of charging on that day, but still feather in his cap. But at this point, is Trevor Lawrence more likely just to be a solid quarterback, Kirk Cousins-y type, or is it still in his reasonable range of outcomes that we're talking about, like MVP candidate Trevor Lawrence, or cover of Madden Trevor Lawrence? I mean, we thought we were hoping anyway he was going to be that second thing, and right now he looks more like, okay, he's good. You can win with him. You can go to the playoffs with him, but maybe he's not the generational quarterback. The whole idea the year before he was drafted was like, oh, lose all your games, get Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah,
and he doesn't. It's unfair to saddle somebody with, okay, you need to totally be generational. Granted, some guys are generational. I would say John Elway was generational. Talking about a great 30 for 30. By the way, Marvin Demoff does that 30 for 30. They use Demoff's notes anyway. He represented Elway. He represented Marino. 6 quarterbacks went in that first round. Ones. Yeah, Elway to Marino. It's so good. And when people, I'm kicking myself now because we were talking on something recently, were like draft day versus Jerry Maguire, and I should have put the 30 for 30 in there about Elway and Marino. That's something I try to watch about once a year, because it's fascinating about what the draft was, what the draft is like now, and the similarities. 6 quarterbacks going in the first round, and
3 went to the Hall of Fame. 3 basically obscurity, except Ken O'Brien whenever he played in Miami.
Ken O'Brien was good. Ken O'Brien won. I think he won. Did he win 2 quarterback passing rater titles? He won at least 1.
He might. I think he did. Yeah. But
Ken O'Brien, and Jet fans will vociferously say this too, that I think he might have had some injury problems. Tony Eason, disappointment, a mild one. He actually got MVP votes one year, which shocked me. But
yeah,
he wasn't great. I don't know how committed he was to being great. He might have been a little bit wilted in the big moments sometimes. Todd Blackledge did not make it. Don't tell me the other quarterbacks. So there's Elway. The 3 Hall of Famers obviously are Elway, Kelly, and Marino.
No, we just did.
We get all of them?
Blackledge, and O'Brien.
Okay, we did get all 6 of them. Okay,
yeah,
good. Yeah, that's just something every football fan should know. Certainly, people of our age who. But do you remember the first year you watched the draft? I didn't watch that draft live. I was engaged in it. I remember being fascinated on what would happen with Elway, and I knew the Patriots might take a quarterback, but I didn't watch that draft. I'm trying to remember maybe the early 90s was the first time I actually watched a draft.
I think I watched that draft because the Rams had the number 2 pick, and that was they drafted Eric Dickerson.
Yeah.
So and I really wanted to see them, and I was a big fan of Elway. Elway went to high school about 10 minutes where I live.
Granada Hills?
Yeah, Granada Hills High School. So, he's a legend in the San Fernando Valley,
for sure.
And so I just thought, yeah, I was really interested in where he was going to go. And then, and I was also a Marino fan from, I don't know how, just watching college football on Saturdays. And I couldn't believe he went to Miami. And I thought, but they've got David Woodley. Why do they need him? But, now he's still my favorite quarterback of all time.
They asked Marty Schottenheimer. I think this was on the Elway documentary ESPN did. One of the Sports Century series was so good. I know we live in a golden age for documentary now, but I hope people don't forget. Go on YouTube and watch the horse racing ones. They're so good. And watch watch the Gretzky one and watch the Reggie Jackson one. And if you can stomach it, watch the Pete Rose one. Although Rose is a fascinating guy. I've read a lot. I've read the new Rose biography recently. I don't think it uncovered all that much new ground, but Pete Rose is fascinating. I wish he would get out of his own way sometimes. Yeah. It would be nice. It would be nice to be able to love Pete Rose, and he just makes himself kind of unlovable. But the Sports Century piece on Elway, they're talking to Marty Schottenheimer, and they said, Marty, who's the greatest quarterback, and he's like, well, if I had to win one game, I'd have to pick Joe Montana. And Marty did coach Joe Montana, so that's probably part of that too. But he said, I've had to win one game, I'd have to pick Joe Montana. He goes, but if I had one play, I'd take John Elway. And that, I think, so succinctly sums up what Elway was about, where a play was never dead and he could throw across his body. And I know people are going to say, his stats weren't that great. You really had to be there. He didn't, until the end of his career, he never really he had a lot of solid receivers. He never played with a Rice or a Moss or, Herman Moore I think could be in the Hall of Fame, and he isn't, but just was a terrific player, or Stanley Morgan or Wesley Walker. He didn't really have those guys.
Or the guys that Marino had, the Marx brothers,
for sure,
and Clayton.
For sure. Marino was, as a Patriots fan, I every time Marino had 3rd and 13, I'm like, well, I know how this ends. He throws a 17-yard dart over the middle and they score a touchdown. The Patriots forever could not beat Miami, and it was such a shocker that they beat Miami that one year in the AFC Championship game and got to play the Bears, took a 3-0 lead on the Bears, and then of course, that Chicago team, maybe the best team of all time, certainly in the conversation, just laid the smack down in their coronation. But the one game they did lose was to Miami. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, even as a Patriots fan, and I enjoyed that win immensely. Talk about the NFL, right? It's not, we were talking about earlier, I think backstage, did the NFL want Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce in the Super Bowl? Well, maybe. Did they do something nefarious to create that? No, of course they didn't. You can't tell me that the NFL in 1985, that Pete Rozelle wasn't thinking. I think Rozelle was still commissioner. Or I don't think he handed it to Tagliabue yet.
Yeah, I think he was still there. He was still the guy.
They obviously want Chicago, Miami, Act 2.
Oh, can you imagine?
They had played on a Monday night, and everything Miami played well, but they also had a couple of weird deflections in that game and whatever. But it was the best offense, the best defense, generational defense. And I'll tell you, Jorge, if you had said to me after Marino's second season, where they go to the Super Bowl, they lose to the 49ers, and you would promise me he would have essentially a healthy career. He had that one year he had the major injury in the mid-90s, but basically he was healthy his entire career and played into his late 30s on Miami teams that regularly made the playoffs. If you had told me that Dan Marino would never get to a Super Bowl again, I'd say you are crazy. He's going to go to 4 or 5 of them. He's going to win a couple of them. I mean, he'll certainly get back there. I'll guarantee you he gets at least to a second one. And sometimes I just can't wrap my arms around it. How does Drew Brees go to 1 Super Bowl? How does Aaron Rodgers go to 1 Super? I know that Brees and Rodgers were sometimes playing each other and eliminating each other, but how does Dan Marino go? I know the running game wasn't always great, and sometimes just odd things happen. But how does Dan Marino go to 1 Super Bowl? How does that make any sense?
That one, and how many times did he get knocked out by Jim Kelly and the Bills? So that and one time it was in Miami. So right there on the AFC Championship.
That Buffalo team gets such a bad rap. Yes, they did win a championship, but they went 4 straight times. They have to come back over the Oilers, the Frank Reich game in their back pocket, and nobody was going to beat the Redskins into the 1991. Just Rippon just couldn't miss that year, and Joe Gibbs at the peak of his powers. That was a juggernaut, and those 2 Dallas teams were incredible. And the Giants, it bothers me that Bill Belichick gets a lot of guff, and I realize he's not warm and cuddly, and he's made some of his problems that he's facing at the end of his career now, and it's kind of frustrating to see that he couldn't get a job, and did Bob Kraft poison the well, and some of that stuff we won't ever know. But I mean, what Belichick's coaching genius to somehow find a way to get that Giants team to beat a Buffalo team that was clearly superior. I don't know. I think he deserves a ton of credit. I think he gets it too, to be fair. But when people are like, oh, Bill Belichick never won anything without Tom Brady. Well, he won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator. And I know they had Lawrence Taylor, who's, amazing player, and they had unbelievable support to add to Taylor. Again, what would Taylor be on a bad team? It's open to debate. He had great players around him too. But, what Belichick did getting a couple of good, maybe not great Giant teams to Super Bowl championships, largely on the heels of their defense, although I do think Phil Simms was grossly underrated, both in his time and then retrospectively. But man, what a great time to be alive. I mean, Bill Belichick, Lawrence Taylor, the Bills, Dan Marino, John Elway. I hope, sometimes, Jorge, people will say, oh, Larry Bird wouldn't be that good today. That's crazy. They tell him to shoot 15 threes a game, and he's unbelievable passer. The game's all about spacing, and it's all about recruiting teammates. Everybody would want to play with this guy. Larry Bird would be a god today. For sure. I mean, who goes to the three-point shooting contest, says who's playing for second, and then throws up the winning shot, and it's the ball isn't even halfway to the goal, and he puts up his finger, number one. He would look so stupid if that rims out. But it didn't rim out because he's Larry Bird. You had to be there to see Larry Bird. You had to be there to see John Elway. You had to be there to see Dan Marino. Just like it killed me that I didn't see Walton. I didn't see Joe Namath. Yeah. Joe Namath is like the football version of Walton. He was unbelievable for a very short time, and then he was hurt. And then his stats were kind of wrecked. And it was all like, well, you had to see him. You had to see him in Super Bowl III. You had to see him when he could still run. You had to see him before he'd had 17 knee surgeries, and man, just what a time to be. I just hope, people, some of the younger people, there's some great young people in the fantasy space, really smart. And a lot of people are data driven, and that's great. And I realize the data isn't always going to back up a Namath or who I didn't see, or back up a Marino or an Elway. Marino it will. He has the stats. Elway doesn't.
Yeah.
And it was, man, you had to, they were on the 2.5 yard line. The Browns were basically in the Super Bowl, and Elway willed them to force overtime and then won the game in overtime. I mean, that's the stuff you never forget. I will never forget that game. I'll remember exactly where I watched it. I'll never forget the Flutie Kosar game. I'll never forget the Gibson game. That's the stuff you live for.
Oh, it's just, oh my goodness. I could literally do this for like 3 hours, but I just looked at how long we've been on. But you're right. I mean, there is some historical context that can be taken from from past, even though it's a different game now than it was 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago. But there are certain things. You mentioned Marino. I tell people all the time, it's like, there are three basically pillars of the modern passing game. There was the Air Coryell Chargers.
Mm-hmm. Thankfully in the Hall of Fame. Finally. Man, did they wait too long on that?
And exactly. Air Coryell Chargers, the West Coast offense with the 49ers, and then and Marino Marino in 84, and then again in 86. So just incredible. And just, those guys, everybody in the modern passing game has a debt to pay to them.
And what Namath did.
Yes.
And Namath pushing the ball downfield and throwing for 4,000 yards when, you were happy if your quarterback threw for 2,500 yards. It was just such a different game then. And the pass defense rules were so different. And Namath was, I feel cheated that everything I know about Namath is all in retrospect and it's on grainy film. And I just didn't really get to appreciate it. But also just kind of sad the turn his life took. I mean, he's like this ultimate playboy. And then he ends up, getting married kind of unhappily, and he kind of had his heart broken. It's ironic. Johnny Bench had a similar path in life. He was kind of a little bit of a playboy. He married a socialite at one point. The marriage didn't go right. He eventually got remarried. I think his second marriage didn't work out either. And look, relationships are hard. I'm not picking on anybody. I see these guys sympathetically, realizing I wasn't in either relationship. I don't know where the fault lies, but it's just funny that Joe Namath, was basically the most eligible bachelor at one point in the world. And then he kind of had his heart broken. I don't know if it's ever really been repaired, but, I just hope he can find some peace and, some joy in his final lap. I feel the same for Johnny Bench. The documentary MLB Network did on Johnny Bench was very bittersweet. And I think a lot of the Namath stuff is bittersweet too. But what a player. And everybody who played with Namath swore by him. He was, he got along with players of all backgrounds. And even though he was the high priced player, he quickly got the respect of those guys. A lot of times there can be division there can be jealousy. That was never a problem with Namath. So, and he's the reason why the NFL and the Super Bowl is what it is. Why the AFL was taken seriously. That's about Joe Namath as much as anything.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. See, now my first year as a football fan was 1977 when he became the Rams starting quarterback for 4 games, and he had that handlebar mustache, the big monster shoulder pads. But it was clear that it was
the era of the bad trade, right? I mean, why did the Rams do it? Why did the 49ers think that O.J. Simpson had anything left, and they stocked Buffalo's fridge with a bunch of draft picks for O.J., who was behind his prime at that point. And I know he had a very, very strange life, and he basically went from being famous to infamous, but still sad to note his passing. He used to talk about the turf, the artificial surface that Candlestick Park had at that point. They said, hey, Juice, how's your knee going to handle Candlestick? And he said, we call it Candlestone. That was his line about, I can't even, I don't remember that park having an artificial surface, but I guess it did when OJ wrapped his career. But trades that would never happen today. You trade for some player so far past his prime, and you give up a bunch of picks. And the Patriots, this was a different experience. They traded Jim Plunkett when that didn't work out to the 49ers, and they set up their team to be really good. They never could cash in on it for a Super Bowl, but the Patriots had unbelievable drafts like 3 or 4 years in a row. And a lot of that was from the capital they got from the 49ers. And in modern day, the Herschel Walker trade, the Ricky Williams trade, right? I mean, you still see this stuff sometimes. Teams go all in. We just saw it with the Panthers and the Bears, right? I mean, the Panthers probably traded too much to get Bryce Young. And now a year later, they're the Bears, cigars in hand. They got the quarterback they want, and they have a stock fridge all around them. I cannot wait to watch the Chicago Bears in 2024.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna be doing so. One last thing. Is there anything else you're looking at for this year beyond the young players? Is it going to be with underdog drafts being already eight of the first 12 players being wide receivers? Are we going to be looking wide receiver heavy again in the first couple rounds?
For sure. I'm a anchors away guy at running back. I want one running back I can feel really good about, but that could be a first round pick. That could be a second round pick. That could be a third round pick. I don't, because you can't do best ball in Michigan right now, which is really frustrating. I'm not getting the practice reps that I used to get in previous years. So I'm going to have to find a way to supplement that. I do have a magazine mock coming up in a few days, but I miss that. I would do a bunch of mocks and not mocks, but a bunch of best ball drafts to get some skin in the game and get the player pool under my belt. I will say one thing that I'm definitely going to go double or nothing on, and not just to be stubborn. I had Garrett Wilson go to the moon last year, and that dream died on the 4th snap of the season. Aaron Rodgers got hurt. I'm not sure what Aaron Rodgers still is and still isn't. And talk about a player that you have to divorce some of his personal ideas. I'm not sure we see eye to eye on a lot of real world issues, but I think Aaron Rodgers can still play. And if nothing else, I think he's good enough to say, oh yeah, Garrett Wilson. And I realize they've added other pieces, but Garrett Wilson, he's my guy. I'm going to have Garrett Wilson shares this year. And I'm also Breece Hall. I know right now he's probably the consensus number 3 overall pick. And talk about building a team with an anchors away running back or, a hero RB, some people might call it. I would be happy to have Breece Hall on a stable of wide receivers.
Exactly. I would, if I were to pound the draft for McCaffrey, Breece Hall, or Bijan Robinson in the first round, then I'd just go wide receiver for a while. And you know what? One thing that I heard that I saw you mention was grabbing that second quarterback in single quarterback leagues, which not a lot of people do that. And I actually think that's a great strategy and something I'm going to be exploring. I want your thought on it real quick as kind of like one of our last question.
I'm not sure what I've said on that, but because that's very league dependent to me.
Yeah.
But let me leave you with this. I apologize. I'm not going to give you a good answer to that question, so I'm not going to try to do it. But let me give you with the strategy. I talked about the hero RB build. Really, the biggest, strongest draft advice I would give people, especially if you're playing a 3 receiver set or a league with multiple flexes, You got to get receivers who start themselves. And I realize Nacua came out of nowhere, but it's so rare and you can get like nice depth, a nice wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, maybe a wide receiver 3. Jordan Addison came on in his rookie year last year, a good player out of USC, but the odds of getting a real earth mover on the waiver wire late in your wide receiver draft, Nacua to the side, it's just not that likely. And also a lot of these players it's going to be hard to know when to play them. You're going to get the timing wrong. I want a wide receiver room that is the envy of my league. I want at least one of the 2 or 3 best rooms in the league, maybe the best, and I want them to start themselves. I do not want to be debating which of these guys who are probably ranked around wide receiver 33, which of them am I going to play this week? I don't want that. I want like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 9, wide receiver 15, all on my team.
Absolutely. I love it. Love it. Well, on the 2 quarterback thing, and this is something I'm going to explore, is kind of like quarterback platoons. And where last year, one of my ideas was Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins, playing them when one of them was home. And because one of them was home, at least one of them was home 14 of the 17 weeks. So, and it would have worked great if
Goff has jagged home road splits. We know that too.
And it was so there. I think there were going to be some. Dak Prescott had big home road splits. So I think there's guys in like that 10 to 15 range if you double tap 2 guys in there. But I think I'm going to look at that more closely after the schedules come out, so that we could start looking at some quarterbacks. So it's not going to work if you get CJ Stroud or Joe Burrow or something like that, but because you invested too much draft capital and you're going to have to backfill. But maybe like a Jordan Love and a Jared Goff or something like that. Some kind of combination like that.
I'm going to leave your listeners with one more thing really quick. I know you have to go. This has been a wonderful call. Thank you so much for having me on. I want to say one more thing. The people who set up leagues, okay, want to make your league better? Start more players. Okay. Now, you may not maybe be comfortable with Scott Fish sets up rules that are so complicated. Sometimes I don't even know all of them, but they're fun. Scott Fish is a wonderful guy and the biggest heart in the world. The Fishbowl is awesome. I'm so proud to be a part of it. And I've had some good Fishbowl teams. I haven't had a great Fishbowl team yet, maybe this year. But when you start more players, you make your draft more dynamic. And this whole idea of, every draft is the same and we all know who the same 11 players are going to be. Well, if you're playing Superflex, that goes out the window. If you're playing with a bunch of different flexes, that goes out the window. Make your draft. Maybe you play in a tight end premium league, which some leagues do. It doesn't matter what your tweak is. Just have some fun with it. And when you start more players, one outlier performance, good or bad, doesn't affect you as much as it normally would. If you're in a league that doesn't start a lot of players, you lose your best player, you might really be in trouble. But if you're starting 11 or 12 guys, that's just one piece to the puzzle. I think it is better for strategy. I think it's better for things evening out. It's just better if you have more stake in the game, more to watch, more to root for. So if you feel up to it, and I realize some people want to play in a more simplified league, maybe it's more casual, that's okay. You're probably not listening to this podcast, but that's okay. But I think you make your league better, more dynamic, more interesting when you start more players.
I agree. And you know what? You're still going to end up sitting the wrong player at some point. So just don't think that it's almost going to be like best ball where you end up. No, there's still going to be guys that you end up sitting down. So I love it. Yes. Thinner benches, start more players. So
love it. Both of those things. Yes, I'm glad you said thinner benches too. This whole idea, like let's have 1 million guys in the bench and nobody worth picking up. There should always be something interesting on the wire.
Always a little bit. Amigo, this is, I think we had the goal of talking about more things, and this was just a wild, rollicking time, and I had a blast. We may have to do this again. So,
for sure.
So yes, whether on camera or just sitting having beers. Hopefully, I'll see
both of those things. Yeah, I'm sorry I had to talk about Bob Costas for 47 minutes. So we couldn't talk about Led Zeppelin, and we couldn't talk about the Replacements or REM or any other number of bands or movies or whatever. But you needed your Kirk Gibson fix, you needed your Big Chill fix, and I hope we talked enough football to make it worth it. And Jorge, I'm just glad to call you a friend. I'm glad that we've done work together, and we're going to do more of it in the future, I'm sure. Yes. And I can't wait to break this all down with you. Here's to the future, and here's to a little reliving of the past as well.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. Don't forget the past, familia. Don't forget the past. Well, you find him at Scott_Pianowski. So you find me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter. Please, again, make sure you follow us on YouTube. You get great shows like this. This is this is one that you get to. You know what? When you're having trouble, when you just can't sleep, watch this again, and you just pick up so many different things.
No.
Or
I'll
watch
I'll
Big
put you.
Show.
I'll bore you so much with my stories, and I'll put you to sleep. You can say it. Listen to Pianowski talk
No.
about Peter Gammons and Dennis Eckersley for 20 minutes. Sure.
Oh man. Well, muchas gracias, familia.
It was so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Oh, muchas gracias. Salud.